There are quite a few brutal execution methods that grace our history books, from racking to rat torture to even being boiled alive, but being executed by the rising tide, that's both brutal and painfully slow, as you agonisingly await a fate that teases you with the slowly rising waters. It's slow enough that you have time to think about the fact you will very soon be dead, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. One such occasion is the story of Alice Tankerville. She was the common law wife of a London criminal called John Wolfe, and together they were caught with a huge amount of money, thought to have been stolen from the royal coffers. It was then during 1534 that both Alice and John found themselves imprisoned within the Tower of London, and a loyal and faithful guard to King Henry VIII, by the name of John Board, fell head over heels in love for Alice, something Alice and John Wolfe would use in their favour. Now, Alice eventually found herself alone in the frightening tower, surrounded by the screams of those in next-door cells being tortured, and it was only John Board who could offer her any sort of comfort. You see, John Wolfe had been released and he had then fled to Ireland. Alice slowly fell for Board, and they made plans for a future. Board and Alice worked out a way to escape the fortress, and armed with a stick and oiled hinges on the cell door, Alice broke out of her cell and worked her way through the passages of the maze-like tower. Alice made her way to the cold harbour gate, and with the key given to her, she let herself out to freedom. She waited for Board, and once he arrived, they walked hand in hand towards his home. But they were caught, and Alice was recognised. The freedom lasted a matter of moments, and now both Alice and Board found themselves being dragged back to the tower to face their punishments. John Board was thrown into a tiny dungeon known as Little Ease, an oubliette-type dungeon where the prisoner couldn't sit or stand or even lay down, and was forced into unnatural positions which were painful, and very often prisoners were left to die, forgotten. John begged for mercy from his lifelong friends, but that friendship had gone, and mercy was nowhere to be seen, and his agonising screams could be heard echoing the walls of the tower. Now John Board was killed by being hung from chains outside of the tower's walls. He was naked and he died from exposure. He was an example of what would happen to traitors. Alice was thrown into a cell which was unbreakable. A large iron bolt kept the door secure, and Alice was left alone in the darkness. Unbeknown to her, her husband was on his way back to the tower, and together they would share the same fate. The guards had purposely waited for Wolfe's return with a plan to reunite them in their shared death. The execution method planned for Alice was simple: to be hung in chains at low tide alongside her husband. Alice and John Wolfe were then dragged to the bank in front of the tower and shackled to the wet and slippery wall, a wall that they both desperately tried to climb in a bid to escape the incoming tide, a tide which would without a doubt end their lives via drowning. Now, Alice Tankerville is the only woman to have ever escaped the fortress known as the Tower of London, but the freedom she felt was very brief, and soon she felt the feeling of water filling her lungs as the tide rushed in and swamped her and her husband whilst being trapped in front of the very fortress that imprisoned them. Being drowned by an incoming tide is an execution method that has been used across the world for centuries, and the agonising weight must have driven Alice to a point of mental break as she helplessly awaited a fate that she couldn't outrun. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe. And again, thank you for watching.